Hey friends, this is another video to discuss the schema, how to create your first migration using EntityFrameworkCore. Just create that schema changes and how to deploy that onto the target database server. So really quick, this is a quick video. I have a very basic app here. So I have a AppDB context already created. And if you look at the AppDB context, there's nothing here, pretty much bare bones, because I just want to focus on creating the migration, not so much about the other aspects of the DB context and stuff like that. I have a short video on creating a DB context and what some of these things mean. So in another video in my channel, so check it out on that. So from a migration standpoint, you really have to first understand what is schema. So anything like the structure related to the structure, like the tables, the columns, and the relationships between these tables, all of that is part of the schema definition of your database, right? So managing the schema can be done using EntityFrameworkCore migrations, right? So using migrations, you can modify the schema. But keep in mind, though, it can cause data loss. So especially, let's say you roll back a migration. So you went to a prior schema. So let's say you dropped a table as part of that, but that table already has data. So when you again do the migration, then that table will be created for you, but the data in the table is lost unless you have a backup. That's really a bad scenario, especially in production. So anytime you have to always inspect your migration files generated. I'm going to show you the migration files and make sure that the migration code that is auto-generated by EntityFrameworkCore package is not creating any sort of data loss. That's very important. Right? And there are other tools as well, especially if you want to manage schema, like you maintain a database in the version control alongside the source control, like your application source code. There are other tools as well, like DBUp, Fluent Migrator, and stuff like that. Now, those can also help script-based database version control. They do that as well. So if you want to actually see the SQL script that's going to be applied to the target database, DBUp and Fluent Migrator are also good choices out there. Okay, so with that said, let's start to create a migration. So before you create a migration, you got to have the entity classes in place, right? I described about the entity classes and what they mean in another video. Check it out. But in here, I have really basic classes here. So I have a person class. That is all I have. I have a class, and it has two properties, person ID and a name. And this is the one that's going to turn into a table with two columns, person ID and a name column. So this one is going to be a primary key because by convention, if you have the same name as a class name suffixed by ID, that's going to act like a primary key. And then this is just a regular column, which is of the type string. In .NET, that's going to get translated into, I'm assuming it's nvarchar max, but you also have control over changing the SQL data type. But I'm not going to get into that in this one because this is primarily about creating a migration. All right, so the first thing you got to do is I'm going to be working with the .NET cross-platform tooling. So we need to install the .NET tooling for the Entity Framework. So I'm assuming in the packages section, in my prior video already talked about adding these packages. Without these packages, you can't even build a project because it's going to give you errors. Because I already showed about how to register your AppDB context in the startup in a .NET Core application, right? So if you go to the startup file here, I'm using the services.appdb context. So this one is basically and also using the SQL Server. These commands are only available if you have the packages. So up in the using statement, I am using EntityFrameworkCore in line number 9 here. So this is coming from the package. All right, so let's open the command prompt. Just keep in mind that you should be using, you should be in the path of the project. So wherever your AppDB context is residing, that's the project you have to be in that project path. So if I open my command prompt, this path is relative to the path in which my AppDB context resides. So that's an important step that a lot of people forget, that you get an error that cannot find the context and stuff like that. But make sure you're already in that path. So once you're in that path, the number one step is install the .NET EF cross-platform tools. So right now, we don't know if it's installed or not because I worked on this example before. So if I say .NET EF, let's see if it detects the change. It says could not execute because the command or file was not found. So the cross-platform tooling is not available. So we want to go ahead and install .NET tool package for EF. So I'm going to say install --global. So what this does is just installs it globally. So if you have multiple projects running on your machine, then this particular tool, EF tool, can be applied across all project paths. So you don't have to install per each project, right? So then just say .NET -EF. So what this should do is it should install the tools package for EF for us. Okay, so it's all installed, and the next step is to make sure that we're not getting the same error again. So go ahead and say .NET EF just to make sure that the command is recognized. Yep, so it's good to go. And once you are at that step, the next step is to create migrations, right? So before you run the migration, just take a look at the project here. I'm going to collapse everything. If you expand it, right now you don't see a folder called migrations because no migrations are generated yet. So that's what we're going to do. The migration is nothing but the schema changes that are going to be applied to your database, right? But keep in mind, you have to already have the connection string to the database. I already talked about that in a previous video. So if you go back to your app settings, I already have a connection string here. The name of the database that I'm going to create is called EF Core Migrations. Right, where's that at? EF Core Migrations. If I open my database here, right as of right now, if I expand my database, I don't have EF Core Migrations. But at the end of this, we should have that generated for us. So the next step is to create that migration files. So we go back to the command prompt, and this is where you say .NET EF migrations, right? Add something like initial schema or something like that. When you hit enter, so it should try to create that initial files for us that has the single table, because we have only one class, entity class here, and this is a table that we want to be part of that database. So the build started. The first thing it does is when you try to create a migration, it builds the project so that you don't have any compile errors before it tries to auto-generate the migration code for you. And the build succeeded. So the next step is to actually create a folder called migrations and to create that auto-generated code as part of that. So at this point, it is already created. If you notice in the background here, so I have a migrations, and all of this part is new. So inside of that, you have 3 different files here. You have the actual migration file and a designer file, which is kind of like a code behind. It's kind of hidden that supports that migration. And then you have the snapshot file. So let's talk about these files a little bit. So here you have the migration file. This is nothing but the instructions that are actually given to the database server. So there's 2 primary methods here. There is a up method and a down method. Everything in the up method is responsible. These are the changes that are actually going to be implemented on your database server. And down method is kind of like a rollback mechanism, right? If any of these statements, in this case, we only have a single statement here called create table. It's going to create one table with the name people, and there are two columns, and there's a person ID is a primary key, and with an identity setup, and the second one is a name, which is nullable. This is not nullable, and the constraints is the primary key with the person ID column. So if this fails for whatever reason, then it basically just drops the table, right? So if the table is created, but if something happens, then it invokes that. And also, if you ever want to roll back this migration, this gets invoked basically it drops the table. So this is where I'm talking about the data loss. If you already have data in this people table, then if you roll back the migration, then the data in the table will be lost. So it's important to inspect the migrations that are generated. And anytime there is data, and if you're rolling back or splitting a table into separate tables, it is best to do that manually using a SQL script. You can still make those scripts part of the migrations, but it is recommended to write your own script in that case and put it in here. So basically, so that's the migration file, and the designer file is basically an internal data model for EF-Core. So EF-Core maintains an internal data model that supports the schema changes that are going to happen, right? And the snapshot file is also the internal data model for EF-Core at the time of generating this migration. So the snapshot, you only have a single snapshot. Even if you have, like, let's say 10 migrations, you will only have a single snapshot.cs, and this snapshot will have the model that the EF-Core keeps in its memory. It uses the snapshot to generate the new migration, because it's the diff between the snapshot, which is up to the latest migration, and the new changes that are not part of the snapshot yet, and that's how it generates a new migration. So, so those are the main three files when you run that command add migrations add using the .NET cross-platform tooling. So once you have the migration, the database is not automatically updated, right? If I refresh it, nothing really changes. We don't have the changes in the database yet. So the next step you got to do is update the database. So we go back to the command prompt and we do the same thing. So .NET EF, in this case, now we're getting into database, not migrations, and all we say is update. So make sure you also issue this command from the project path, or it's you're going to get some errors that it's not found and stuff like that. So it's important. And also in cases where you have multiple projects, in this case, it's a simple dummy project where everything is in the same project, but in reality, in production, you have multiple projects running, and the data project is separated. In that case, you got to make sure there are additional flags like -- project, so you can give additional switches to your commands here to let it know where the project file is and what the startup file is and stuff like that. So that is also important to keep in mind. And all of that is nicely documented by Microsoft. So if you go to the CLI commands for EF-Core, they have all of that nicely done. So now it's done. So it's time to check the database and refresh this. Now you should be able to see the brand new database EF-Core. It has a single table here. Once this expands, it's called people. Well, there's also EF-Core migration history. This is an internal table that EF-Core keeps track of how many migrations are applied. So if you open the data in this, you should be able to see there's only a single migration that we applied so far, and the other table is the main table, which is the people table that has two columns. One of them is a primary key in the name column. But that's how you generate your very first migration. Thank you.